just like to make a quick lecture on what I call my 3 steps in container theory. That's what I've called it. It's a fancy term, but it's basically my 3 steps or 3 levels of containers. In my survival group number 3, cooking in containers, I talk about my survival groups in my adventure craft system in previous videos you can look into on my channel. And the first step in my container theory, or anyone's container theory as far as I'm concerned, is a metal container. Now, a metal container, obviously you can put on a fire, you can cook and boil water. And of course, when I talk about my cooking, that includes boiling water. I call it metal containers, of course, because there are different types of metal containers. You can have from aluminium, the most basic, very lightweight, anodized aluminium, stainless steel, which I think is the best overall. Then you've got like titanium and so forth. Titanium is very good and light but expensive. So you've got different metals, of course cast iron as well if you're in a base camp situation or homesteading. And obviously the metal container is to boil water and cook food on a fire. That's what you really aim to have. It's the most important, or one of the most important or critical things you can ever do, is have that metal container. There's millions of different types of cooking pots, cups, you name it, that can go into your pack and so forth, but it's a metal container that's totally crucial, obviously, to boiling water. So the second step is going to be a second container. At least in a survival situation, what you want to do is boil water. And that's a real survival situation, not so much cooking food, but boiling water to make it safe to drink, if you're going to find water out there. Then you want to dump that water into a second container. That water can then cool down, you can drink it, and you can keep boiling water in the metal container. So that's really a 2-step process. Imagine boiling water, wait for it to cool down, drink it, boil more water. You can see how much longer and time consuming that's going to be. So a second container will let you dump out hot water into a second container, cool down, keep boiling, and that's a much better survival strategy. And the second container can be plastic. No worries at all. You can have a metal container, you can have some sort of plastic container that rests in the metal container. And plastic's fine. You can pour boiling water into a plastic container, it can cool down. If we want to talk about a camping scenario, by the way, when I go camping, I normally take 2 metal containers. I keep one metal container just to boil water in to make my tea and coffee and so forth, or if I need water to drink. And the second container will be just a cooking, which will get dirty and so forth. You can wash it out in the river and so forth, but it's good to keep one or reserve one container just for boiling water to keep it clean for tea, coffee and drinking water. So a second container in that regards is crucial. You can have 2 metal containers, especially in a camping scenario, but it can be plastic. And of course your second container can be a water bottle. You can quite easily dump boiled water into a water bottle, either plastic or metal, but if your water bottle is metal, you can put that onto a fire and you can boil water in your water bottle. And the third step to my container theory are natural containers. Now, natural containers you can boil in, for example, rock boiling, or heating slowly through like bamboo containers and coconut containers and so forth, or a combination of both those 2 things. But it's a very difficult task, time consuming, very arduous, and they might be better suited for a cooler environment like Europe and North America. In a hot environment like here in Thailand, I know from experience, slaving away next to a fire is very difficult, a very questionable survival strategy, especially if you're struggling to find water and disinfect water and you're sweating out even more next to a fire. It's a questionable survival strategy. So you can, in theory, boil water in natural containers, can be done, but they really come into their own as that secondary container to dump water out of. Any sort of natural containers. I've got a video in this playlist where I talk about a selection of containers here in Thailand, natural containers. I also do some rock boiling, and the 2 containers I didn't talk about were birch bark containers in North America. You can fold up birch bark to make a handy container, and also any sort of large leaves, like for example banana leaves, can be folded up in a similar way. And what I realised is you can dump quite easily boiled water straight into those containers, any natural containers, even large leaves and banana leaves, quite easily. So that's where natural containers really come into their element as a secondary container, as a dump for boiling water. Look into natural containers, learn them, practice them. It might come in handy one day, a good bushcraft skill, primitive skill. The thing about rock boiling in natural containers is It's more of a modern development. I don't think back in the day they were doing that. There was talk that some primitive cultures, like in North America, for example, were rock or stone cooking, not rock boiling, vegetables like corn and so forth, even in wicker baskets, dropping hot stones in. They weren't necessarily boiled in water. Don't forget that even up until almost the 20th century, in 19th century London, we had no concept really of boiling water or treated water to make it safe. They were still taking water straight out of the ground, catching cholera and so forth. So I don't think primitive cultures or ancient civilizations knew about that. They were still getting sick and so forth. Ancient Egyptians, there's evidence that they were getting infected from flukes and parasites from the water and so forth. They weren't really boiled in water. They were cooking and they were sterilising food and liquids as a matter of consequence, but they weren't boiled in water to make it safe to drink. And that's also why beer and alcohol was so popular, not so much to have a good time. Even right back thousands of years, up until 19th century London, going to the pub was really popular to drink beer, because they knew beer and alcohol was safe to drink. You ran the risk of getting sick from drinking water, so that's why going to the pub and drinking beer was very common and popular, because it was safe to drink. The alcohol and beer making process rendered the fluids safe to drink, and I'm sure that was the reason, even going back thousands of years, not so much to have a good time. So that's pretty much a three-step process to container theory: a metal container to boil water in, have a second container as a dump. The second container can be plastic, and natural containers you can boil, but it's difficult, time-consuming, and a questionable survival strategy in hot weather. But as a dump, natural containers are great to dump hot water out, any sort of natural containers, even birch bark and banana leaves. So that's pretty much it. Any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.